Hey everybody, welcome to the video and welcome back to MLB DFS. I have missed this so much. It's been a long time coming and it's been a long, painful wait. But we are finally back. We have opening day baseball on July 23rd on Thursday night and it's going to be absolutely awesome. I have missed it so much and I'm very excited. I'm sure you guys are as well. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players. And I cover other sports as well. We have NASCAR going on currently, which has kind of been my big thing on YouTube here. And then we have the NBA coming back shortly as well. So there's a lot to look forward to on the channel. I am very excited. So if you're going to come back to the channel each and every single day or every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you don't follow me over on Twitter, I'm at ChrisPennell16. If you don't follow me on IG, I'm at CPenn16. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, that's always much appreciated. We have over 330 members now, which is absolutely awesome. You get into my Discord chat, my spreadsheets, the projections, the articles, all that fun stuff. If you're interested, check it out. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just get into this slate. So if you're new to the channel and you didn't watch my videos last year, what I like to do is just look at pitching first because that's kind of the most important thing in the slate because we can identify stacks there and we got to pick two pitchers, so they are pretty important. So I like to look at pitching first and then I like to go to batters and just look at some of the guys I like. I usually pick a couple of guys out from each position and then I'll talk about some of the stacks I like as well. So just starting at pitching, we're going to look up top at Garrett Cole. He's 10,000 and he's got the highest ceiling on the entire slate. I mean, Garrett Cole last year was an absolute monster. He was the best pitcher all season long. I mean, he was just so dominant. If we're just looking at his numbers last season, he has an insane 40% strikeout rate, xFIP under 2.5, low hard contact rate at 33.9%, 43% strikeout rate to lefties. I mean, the guy was just unstoppable. Now, he's going up against the defending World Series champs in the Nationals, but don't forget they did lose Rendon, so that's going to take a little bit of a hit to their lineup, but they still have a solid lineup overall. I mean, you got Thane, Soto, and they still got some juice in there for sure, so it's nothing to scoff at, but I mean, Garrett Cole can overpower any lineup. I don't care who it is, so you can certainly have interest in him. Now, the problem with pitching early on this year, I think, is that paying up for pitchers might not be the best move to do so until these guys get stretched out. Now, I think we're going to see anywhere from like 85 to 95 pitches out of these guys early on, which is probably going to end up being 5 to 6 innings, depending on how efficient they are. Maybe 7 if they're being really efficient, but I think for the most part, we're probably going to see Cole with 6 innings here. Now, he can certainly get 10 plus strikeouts in 6 innings. I don't think that would be an issue for Garrett Cole. It's just I don't think these guys are going to hit their absolute ceiling. So spending all the way up for pitchers might not be the move early on until we get a little bit more of a sample size, see how deep they go into games. Because as of right now, it's a little bit more of a guesswork. But still, Garrett Cole, his upside it's insane. And if you're looking at the matchup versus the Nationals, I am using 2019 stats because obviously we have no 2020 stats yet. And I'm probably going to be using 2019 stats for the most part this season. I'll mix the 2020 stats in there a little bit once we get deeper into the season. But we need a bigger sample size than just a few games. So using 2019 right now, but if you're looking at last year, their overall matchup versus righties for the Nationals, they had a 21.6% strikeout rate versus righties, 180 ISO, 323 WOBA, 94 WRC+. Not like elite, not terrible either. So I think Garrett Cole's fine. It's just he's 10,000. I think a lot of people are going to go the Max Scherzer and Clayton Kershaw route this week, or not this week. Sorry, I'm used to NASCAR on Thursday because you can save a. I mean, you're only paying $7,700 and $8,600 for ace-like pitchers. Now, Clayton Kershaw, I mean, Walker Buehler is the best pitcher on that team for sure, but Clayton Kershaw is a better real-life pitcher than he is DFS now. I mean, he's not a DFS darling anymore, but still, we're getting a really good price tag on him. He's got the best matchup on the slate. Then you're getting Max Scherzer, he's in the Garrett Cole tier for sure. I mean, he wasn't as good as Garrett Cole last year, but Max Scherzer is one of the best pitchers in the league, and we can get a $1,400 discount on him. Now, he's not the favorite in this game, so I think that's why they're giving Cole he's also going up against the Yankees, so you have to keep that in mind too. The Yankees have one of the best lineups in the entire league. I mean, they're just absolutely loaded. You got Judge, Stanton, Torres, Gary Sanchez. I mean, they're loaded. So it's obviously a tough time whenever you go up against the Yankees, but you can strike them out. So before I get too ahead, I think Cole's a better option in tournaments. I mean, he's only got 3.5 runs implied against him. He's minus 137 favorite in Vegas. He's fine. There's a good chance he can get the win here, and I think he's going to outscore Max Scherzer, but also you have to keep in mind he's $1,400 more than Max Scherzer. So speaking of Max, he's $8,600. I think we're getting a pretty good price on him. Now, again, these guys are not all the way stretched out. So I think we're going to probably see 5-6 innings out of Max Scherzer here. Maybe if he's efficient, we see him go a little bit longer. I'm not totally sure yet, but I do like the price tag, and I think a lot of people will like it as well. Last season, 2.88 xFIP, 35% strikeout rate, only a 5% walk rate, less than 1 home run per 9 innings, 35% hard contact rate. The numbers were elite for Max Scherzer. There's really nothing bad you can say about him. The only bad thing we can say for Max this slate is that he's going up against the New York Yankees, which is obviously not a matchup you want to be in really ever. If you're looking at their splits versus righties last season, 22% strikeout rate, 217 ISO, 348 WOBA, 116 WRC plus. This is not a matchup you want to see if you're playing the pitcher against that team. The thing is, though, Max Scherzer, he's got heat, and he can't overpower these Yankee bats. I think he can rack up quite a bit of strikeouts in this game. I actually think Cole and Scherzer are going to get a lot of strikeouts. It would not surprise me if we see them both get double digits. I know they're not going to go too deep in the game, but I think they can both get 10 plus here. They're good lineups, but they got plenty of heat, and they can blow it past guys like Judge and Stanton and Gary Sanchez. There's a lot of strikeouts you can get in that lineup. So I do like Scherzer, and I think when the Yankees score, I think it's going to be more so from the bullpen. The Nats had a pretty rough bullpen last year. Now, they did get some help with Harris, but still overall, it's a bullpen you can attack. So I think Scherzer, I think a lot of people are going to make him their spend-up pitcher. Then the second guy they're going to go with is Clayton Kershaw. He comes in at 7,700, and Clayton just makes way too much sense on this slate. He's only got a 3-run implied total against him. He's the heaviest favorite on the slate at nearly minus 300. And the Dodgers should be able to pile it on Johnny Cueto. So as long as Clayton can go 5+ innings here and hold the lead, he should get the win, which is obviously a nice bonus over on DK. And, he just makes way too much sense. Now, he's not like some elite lockdown pitcher like Cole or Scherzer is nowadays, but he should be able to get the job done. The Giants lineup's pretty weak. They lost Evan Longoria and Brandon Belt. They will not be on the opening day roster. That's obviously going to be a boost for Clayton Kershaw. And if you're just looking at the matchup against the Giants versus lefties, they were pretty weak all season long. Last year, they had a 23% strikeout rate, 149 team ISO, 296 WOBA, 83 WRC plus. This is an elite matchup for Clayton Kershaw. I'm not expecting like 10+ strikeouts here with the upside like Scherzer and Cole has, but he should have a very solid outing. He is at 7,700. He should be the highest owned pitcher on this slate. He just makes too much sense. He's a very easy fit, and he's going to be massive ownership. Now, you could take a stance where, hey, he's going to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate. Maybe I should fade him, which you could, but I have a hard time seeing fading Clayton Kershaw on this slate working out for you, to be honest, because, again, we have 4 pitchers. Cueto does not seem like an option to me, and then you could play Scherzer and Cole together for sure. I think it's more of a tournament way to go because it might cost you a Dodger bat or two, which we're definitely going to want Dodger bats on this slate. So fading Kershaw just seems like a bad decision to me. I think this is one of those days you just got to eat that chalk right there. So Clayton Kershaw makes a ton of sense to me. Then Johnny Cueto, I'm not even going to talk about. Now, he doesn't have a big sample size because he has not pitched much because he had Tommy John surgery. So these sample sizes aren't going to be too much of an accurate reflection, but last season, he very, very limited sample size, but he struggled versus lefties. Over a 500 ISO. Again, this is a very small sample size, but the Dodgers have a ton of good lefties, and then they just added Mookie Betts on their lineup. I don't see how Cueto gets out of this game very clean. And and if you're just looking at Vegas, he's going to have the worst time here, according to them. 5.2 run implied team total against him, plus 253 underdog in Vegas. I don't see how this works for Cueto. It's a good pitcher's park in LA, but they have too many good bats. So I'm personally just going to be crossing out Johnny Cueto. You can play, if you're building a whole bunch of lineups, you want to play some Cueto, that's totally fine. But if you're building 1 or 3 lineups, I just don't see how you do it, to be honest. It could work out. He's 5,000. You play Cueto, you play Kershaw together if you want, and just load it. Well, I guess that wouldn't make sense because then you'd be paying up for the Dodgers bat. So if you want to play Cueto and then spend out all the way for a Cole or a Scherzer, totally get that. It's just, I'm not a fan of playing Cueto on this slate. So personally, he's a pass for me. And since there's only 4 pitchers on the slate, I think we can move on to the bats. Now, I don't think it's going to be too long of a video, but we only have two games here. So, and actually, before we move on, I do want to show you just the numbers for the Dodgers bats versus righties last season. They hit a 224 ISO, 347 WOBA, 116 WRC plus, only a 20% strikeout rate. Yeah, I think Cueto might have a pretty tough time here on opening day. And like I said, I just picked a couple of guys from each position that I have some interest in, so you can kind of call it like a mini player pool, really. Now, again, there's only 4 teams on the slate, so it's a very limited player pool, and there's really not that many great options. So, a couple of these guys might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's what we have to work with. So we're going to start with catcher. I think you only have really 2 viable options at catcher, so we might have to spend up a little bit. If you want to punt it, you can. It's just, I think these guys have much more upside than the rest of the catchers. So first off, we're looking at Will Smith here. He's 4,200, and again, I want to stack the Dodgers, so just getting a piece of the Dodgers here makes sense to me. Now he's going to hit lower in the order, but versus righties last season, Will Smith was actually pretty solid. Now, for the most part, I want to attack Cueto with the lefties, but if you're looking at Will Smith's splits versus righties last season, he had a 381 ISO, 410 WOBA, high slugging, 158 WRC plus. I mean, the numbers were pretty good for Will Smith. Now, they weren't the hugest sample size in the world, but still, the numbers were pretty good. And again, Cueto's numbers, very limited sample size from him last season. He only had a .032 ISO given up to righties last season, but again, he's not going to be that good, and I just want all the pieces of the Dodgers that I can. So Will Smith, if you want to just get more Dodgers bats, that's fine. If you want to go with the Yankee bat and Gary Sanchez, that's also fine. We know how good Gary Sanchez is. He's got a ton of power. I saw him rip a ball in, what do they call it, the summer camp games. I think it was yesterday or the day before, but he just absolutely murdered a baseball and went deep. Now, if you're playing Yankees bats, I'm not playing them against Max Scherzer necessarily. I'm pretty much planning for when Scherzer gets out of the game for them to get a hold of the bullpen. Because if you're looking at the bullpen numbers for the Nationals last season, it was not very good. If you're looking at the bullpen data, which I think you guys can see on the screen, Washington had a 5.03 xFIP from their bullpen, which I believe is one of the worst in the entire league. I know Detroit's was awful as well, but I think Washington was at least bottom 5. I mean, they were just absolute trash out of the bullpen. Now, they did add an extra piece, which should boost them up a little bit, but I think overall it's a bullpen we can certainly attack. So if you're playing Gary Sanchez, you're probably assuming he's not going to do anything much against Scherzer, but if he can get a hold of the bullpen, maybe get a home run late in the game or just get a couple of hits, I think that's what you're kind of game planning here for. So I think Sanchez, Will Smith are really your only options at catcher unless you want to just completely punt it. I get that too. I usually punt catcher. It's just only 4 teams on the slate, so we don't have too many options here. We're going down to first base, also second base eligible. We have Max Muncy, and again, there's going to be a lot of Dodgers on this player pool here, but again, they're by far the best options on this slate. Max Muncy crushed righties last season, and again, Cueto, very limited sample size, but he got crushed by the lefties last year, and again, overall, we just want to attack Cueto with lefties. And if you're looking at Muncy's numbers last season versus righties, he had a 372 WOBA, 267 ISO. The numbers all check out for him. He had a high walk rate at 17%. I think Max Muncy is an excellent option here. Is he pretty expensive? Yes, but he's by far the best option at first base in my opinion, so he makes a lot of sense to me. If you want to get a punt option, which we're going to have to use one of these guys because we can't just use all the Dodgers bats because they're pretty expensive, so it's not going to be that easy on this slate. But Austin Slater, he's 3,100, and again, with the injuries to the Giants, I could see him getting a high spot in the batting order, and at 3,100, I think that's fine. I mean, it's going to be a righty versus lefty matchup, so he's got that working for him. Now, Kershaw, again, I don't typically want to play batters against my pitcher, but on a 2-game slate, we're kind of forced to do things we don't want to do, and I wouldn't even hate just playing Slater at 3,100, then loading up other bats. So I'm basically just hoping maybe Slater gets me a hit, gets a walk, maybe gets a run. That's pretty much all I'm hoping for Slater. I'm not expecting too much. So I don't typically recommend playing batters against your pitcher really ever. But on a slate this small and we don't really have much value, I think Austin Slater's interesting. I mean, with the injuries for the Giants, I could see him getting a high spot in the batting order. And if he could just get me a point or two, I'd be pretty happy with that. You could also look at his teammate Wilmer Flores with the injuries. I could see him getting a decently high spot in the batting order. And Wilmer Flores is someone I typically like to use versus lefties. He's actually got some really good splits versus them. So if we just take a look, his numbers versus lefties, Wilmer Flores is a 405 WOBA, 279 ISO, 151 WRC plus, which is actually second best on this slate. He's got really good numbers versus lefties. Now, I know playing batters against Kershaw is not something you typically want to do, but if you look at Kershaw's numbers versus righties last season, he actually gave up a 173 ISO, 284 WOBA, and I mean, I think just using a couple of these cheap righties versus Kershaw might be the way to go if you need value. I mean, it's not the greatest thing to ever do is play batters against your own pitcher, but we're kind of forced to do some gross things that we might not typically want to do here. So Wilmer Flores, Austin Slater, I think are some decent value options on this slate. Keeping it with the Dodgers, I prefer the lefties on this team, but I do think the righties will go a little bit lower owned just because the righty-on-righty matchups, people are going to want those lefties. Makes sense, but Justin Turner, I mean, he's really the only third baseman I really want to play on this slate. I mean, he's 4,100, and again, give me all the Dodgers I can get. He's actually pretty cheap at 4,100. He's going to hit in the middle of that order. He makes sense to me. Corey Seager, 4,400. He's really the only shortstop I want to play. If you want to get different and go with Trey Turner, I get that. It's just he's going up against Garrett Cole. I can get a discount with Corey Seager, lefty versus Cueto. I think he makes a lot more sense than paying up for Trey Turner. You could also go with Gleyber Torres, who might get a hold of someone in the bullpen for the Nationals, but really Corey Seager, I think he's going to be the highest owned guy, and he just makes a lot of sense here. Give me the lefties on the Dodgers versus Cueto. I think it's just the best way to go. Going into the outfield, we actually have quite a few options here, but Cody Bellinger, he's 5,100. He is one of the best plays, if not the best plays on the entire slate. He crushes righties. If we look at Bellinger's numbers, obviously he's just one of the best batters in the entire league, but his numbers were great versus lefties last season too. He had a 316 ISO, 150 WRC plus versus lefties. But if we look at versus righties, he's got a 328 ISO, 423 WOBA, 167 WRC plus, basically the top numbers across the board. If you look at Cueto's numbers last season, again, small sample size, but I gave him a 520 ISO to lefties. It would not surprise me if Bellinger starts this season off with a homer. Again, really can't just say someone's going to get a home run, but I think Bellinger's got one of the best chances on the entire slate. So he's very expensive, but honestly, he's the best play on the entire slate. Very expensive, but again, if he gets a homer, you're going to be sitting pretty. Now, Mookie Betts, the new addition to the Los Angeles Dodgers, and that just makes this lineup unfair. I mean, the Dodgers lineup was great last season, but now you're going to have one of the best hitters in the entire league. It's almost just unfair, really. But Mookie Betts, I mean, he's great versus righties. He's great versus lefties. It doesn't really matter who he's going against. I'll usually have interest in Mookie, and that's the case again. You're getting actually a 200 discount off of Bellinger here, but if you can spend up for both, that would be preferable. But if you had to pick one, I would say with Bellinger, but Mookie Betts is a very close second. If you're looking at his numbers versus righties last season, he had a 391 WOBA, 246 ISO, 142 WRC plus. The numbers are just good all around here. I can say nothing bad about Mookie Betts. Do I prefer the lefties versus Cueto? Yes, but I mean, it's Mookie Betts. He's on an all-star team, all-star lineup, and there should be quite a few runs scored from the Dodgers, and I think Mookie Betts should be a decent part of that. So definitely like Mookie. If I can get the extra 200 for Bellinger, I would prefer that, but still an excellent option. Now, since I've talked a lot about chalk guys, I wanted to pick out a couple of low-owned tournament options here because I don't like their matchups, but the numbers check out, and if you want to get off some chalk, you can do it. So, first guy I want to talk about is Juan Soto here at 4,800 going up against Garrett Cole. Now, picking anyone against Cole is really not a smart choice, but on this slate, we're going to have to hunt some home runs. I think Juan Soto's got a decent chance. If you're looking at his numbers versus righties last season, I mean, they were just excellent. 303 ISO, 414 WOBA, 416 on base percentage, 155 WRC plus, 18% walk rate. It's just, man, Garrett Cole, he was really good versus lefties last season. He had a 43% strikeout rate versus lefties last year. That's nearly half the guys he faced last year that were lefties he struck out. Absolutely insane. But if you want to get off some Mookie Betts chalk or even some Cody Bellinger, I think Juan Soto is going to have some pretty low ownership compared to those guys. And look, he's one of the best batters in the league. And you could maybe get a low-owned home run here. Now, the numbers for Cole versus lefties, I mean, they're scary, but he did give up a near 200 ISO versus them. So he did give up some power to him. So I don't hate it. It's just he's a pivot off the chalk. Not really endorsing to play Soto a ton on this slate, but if you want to get off the chalk, he makes some sense. Also, Hunter Pence. I think Clayton Kershaw is going to be the highest owned pitcher on this slate. It would make sense that all these San Francisco Giants players are going to be pretty low owned, and Hunter Pence is just an insane price tag. I've heard he's like really cheap over on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, he's nearly $5K, which just seems way too much because a lot of these Giants players got priced really, really low, which makes sense going up against Kershaw. But Hunter Pence, 4,700, but the thing is, Pence was great versus lefties last season. If you're looking at his numbers, he had a 309 ISO versus them, 416 WOBA, 155 WRC plus, which is actually the best on this entire slate versus lefties, 636 slugging. I mean, his numbers were amazing versus lefties last season. And Kershaw, I mean, versus righties, he did give up a little bit of power. If you look at his splits, he gave up a 173 ISO to them, 284 weighted on base. So I actually think he makes some sense here as a tournament option. Now, if you're playing Kershaw, it makes no sense to me to play Hunter Pence. So you're playing Pence if you're fading Kershaw. But again, if you want to get different, play Pence, get off of Kershaw, and you might be able to get a nice low-owned home run there. Now, it's not as easy to call as these Dodger bats, but if you want to get different and not tie with everyone on the slate, you could use Pence there. I mean, the numbers check out. So, and again, I don't have any of the Yankees bats here because I am actually a big fan of Scherzer on the slate, but I do think, Judge, Stanton, Gary Sanchez, they could do some damage on the Nats bullpen, but I don't want to list everybody on the slate here because that does you guys no favors. So, but just know they're playable in tournaments. It's just these are some of the preferred guys I'm looking at. Then going down to Jock Peterson, he's 4,500. He's a guy I always like using versus righties because he is a righty killer. Now, versus lefties, he's trash. But fortunately, we're getting a righty here who did struggle versus lefties. Now, the problem with playing Jock Peterson is that he is one of the first guys that will get subbed out. So if you're playing him and his first at-bat doesn't go well and his second at-bat doesn't go well, you're usually sweating because if they bring in a lefty, Jock Peterson is most likely coming out of the game, and that's it for you because he's not going to be getting subbed back in because that's just not how it works in MLB. So it's always a little bit risky to play Peterson, especially at a 4,500 price tag, but he's certainly a guy that can get hot. I mean, there's stretches where Jock Peterson's just an animal, but if we're looking at his numbers last season, you can see the drastic splits. He's got a .041 ISO versus lefties, 219 WOBA, 34 WRC plus, absolute garbage. But if you look at versus righties, much better, 319 ISO, 377 WOBA, 137 WRC plus, over 500 slugging. Much better player versus righties. So Jock Peterson is certainly in play for me. Now, last year he usually led off versus righties. That shouldn't be the case anymore, especially with the addition with Mookie Betts. It's definitely not going to be, it's definitely not going to be the case. He's going to be lower in the order, which obviously going to hurt his value. But still, he's a righty crusher. I still think he's a fine option. AJ Pollock, again, I prefer the lefties versus Johnny Cueto, but he is pretty cheap at 3,900, and getting a Dodgers bat below 4K is pretty solid to me. So he's going to be hitting lower in the order, but again, just get some cheaper Dodger exposure that less people will be on. I think Pollock's fine. And then just one other guy, if you can look at Slater again in the outfield if you need a cheap outfielder, but Adam Eaton, he's going to get a high spot in the order, should be batting second. It's not like he's a great play to me. I don't like using guys against Garrett Cole. I mean, the strikeout rate versus lefties is absolutely insane. But there's not a lot of options on the slate, and if I can get a guy below 4K that's hitting in the top 3, I might take it. Maybe he does some damage to the bullpen. I know the Yankees bullpen's obviously great. Now they don't have Chapman because he's got the Rona, but still, maybe Adam Eaton can, get on base, get a run, something like that. Not expecting much, but I think he's a viable, cheap option down there. But I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. I appreciate you guys listening. I am so excited that baseball is back. I am really looking forward to the Friday slate more than I am this opening day slate because I hate the small slates. But we got 11 games on Friday. We have a lot to look forward to, so I'm very, very excited. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, again, it's all on socials are down below. If you want to support me on Patreon, it's always much appreciated. Links in the description below. Yeah, that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.